Good morning, everyone. I think we're live. I think this is working. Hope you're all having a great day. First things first, let's have a sip of coffee. Start the morning off with bean water. So I'm here in Baja Mar still, in the Bahamas. It's a lot of fun. Poker's not going so well. I have done an excellent job of getting about 4 starting stacks in every tournament I play. But then, inevitably, something happens. I get short and I lose. Yesterday, I had a set and I ran into a straight flush. That said, I'm trying to remember the exact spot. Board was something like whatever. It was a low set, and the board ran out runner straight flush. But I checked behind on the turn because there was a 4-card straight available. So fortunately, I didn't lose a ton of money on that one. I've done quite poorly in all of my all-ins. You need to win your all-ins, but you don't get to pick when you win. It's very important in poker, especially in poker. Sometimes in life, you do not get to pick when you win. If you are here in Baja Mar, I'm buying everyone coffee this morning at Starbucks at 11 a.m. in 2 hours. I have to write 2 articles between now and then. But we're busy doing a little coffee right now, so we'll do that later. There's always stuff to do. Always more good things to take care of. Louis Philippe, welcome. Louis Philippe was nice enough to send in a bunch of topics for us to discuss. So, we're going to go over one of them today. A few other people sent in topics. We'll cover those over the next few days as well. And if you have any topics you want us to discuss on a little coffee, let me know. I'm more than happy to discuss whatever you all want to discuss. This is an interactive show. It's not all about me. It's actually all about you. I'm happy to give my take on whatever topics you want me to give my take on. And if I'm not qualified, I will tell you I'm not qualified. A feller at your job had 6 coffees this morning. That is more than a little coffee. Yes, that's more than a little coffee. I probably have 4 coffees a day when I play poker. It's a little bit too much coffee, probably. But I don't have much coffee when I'm at home. So maybe I should not drink so much coffee. Who knows? All right, today, Louis Philippe wanted to discuss how to play against people who consistently 3-bet. A 3-bet, for those who do not know, is the 3rd bet. Does not mean to raise to 3 big blinds. It means it's the 3rd bet. Now, this is a term that comes from an old, antiquated game most of you have probably never even played called Limit Hold'em. A long time ago, you could only bet in increments of 1 or 2. Now we play No Limit because it's generally just a better game. In my opinion, at least. Not in everyone's opinion. But in Limit Hold'em, the first bet was the blind. The big blind was the first bet. If you wanted to raise, you'd put in 2 bets. Blind is 1 bet, so you put in 2 bets. If you want a 3-bet, you put in 3 bets. That's where the term 3-bet came from. Now, in No Limit Hold'em, it's a little bit confusing because you don't really think of the blind as the first bet. But the term stuck. It is what it is. A 3-bet is a re-raise. So, whenever there's the big blind, the first raise is a raise, the first person to put in more money. So if you're playing 50-cent dollar, the first person to make it $3 or $2, $7, whatever, that's a raise. That's a 2-bet. And then a 3-bet is the re-raise. And at least in my vernacular, on the flop, a 3-bet is not just a raise, it is a re-raise. The first re-raise is the 3rd bet. There is no bet on the flop to start, so there has to be a bet, and then a raise, and then a re-raise. You'll see some people misuse the term on the flop. They'll say the raise is the 3-bet, but that is not true. There is no first bet, right? It's always important to ask, where do terms come from, and why do we use them as we use them? Because that will inform you as to how to use the term correctly, right? Daniel says, getting lunch in Portugal. Welcome. Never been to Portugal, but I hear it's great. All right. We have St. Louis here. We have everyone here. Hello, hello, hello. Why is poker so boring? Poker's only boring if you play with boring people who don't want to have fun and interact. Every single table I've played at in the Caribbean Poker Party has been great. We've all had fun. We've all been chatting. It's been a fun time. So maybe there's something to be said about maybe you're making it boring. Often all it takes is one person to just be kind of nice and kind of jovial, and then you'll have a nice table. I played at one table in the, what was it? It was in the main event the other day. I had Philip Gruzium on my left, Anatoly Filatov on my right, and then there was one angry old man at the end. I don't know what his problem was, but he was angry. And I don't know why, but if your table is full of angry people, then you're going to have a bad time. It's not going to be a fun game. I mean, the guy sat there, played on his phone the whole time, didn't say a word to anybody. It is what it is, right? If your table is all people like that, you're not going to have a fun time. If your table is like my end of the table with me and Anatoly and Phil, well, it's going to be a lot of fun, right? We had a great time. We sat there, we talked, we joked, we needled each other. It was like the most fun experience I've had playing poker in a long time. But really, every single table I've had at this Caribbean poker party here at Baja Mar has been a lot of fun. Run It Up says, you're actually pretty boring and rely on others for entertainment. Don't rely on anyone for anything. Do it yourself. If you actually care, do it yourself. I realized a long time ago, having headphones with sunglasses on does not create for a good poker experience for anyone. So I stopped wearing headphones and sunglasses, right? Hooded says he likes this shirt. I don't actually know what this shirt is. I like it too. My mother-in-law bought it for me. She buys most of my clothes. But anyway, yeah, Run It Up. Get rid of the sunglasses. Get rid of the hoodie. I'm not going to get rid of the hoodie. Hoodies are fine, I suppose. Get rid of the headphones. Talk to people. Be interactive. I mean, it's like if someone sits at the table and you don't know them and there's something unique at all about them, say something. If they ask where they're from, ask what they're doing, ask where they normally play, ask what they do for a living. Just like have fun, talk, be in there. So anyway, speaking about being in there and poker not being boring, let's talk about how to play when someone re-raises you a lot. Right? So, when someone is re-raising you a lot, the first question is, why does this bother you? Louis Philippe asked this question. I know Louis Philippe is a very loose and aggressive player. So 3-betting will bother him because he's opening too much garbage, right? Imagine you open with a very wide range. Let's say 40% of hands from all positions. If someone re-raises you, you're going to have a really difficult time in continuing because you have a lot of junk, right? So what is the most obvious thing you can do to solve this problem? Imagine you only played aces. Let's just pretend about that. Or let's just assume that. Imagine you only played aces. Would you care if someone 3-bet you a lot? No, you'd be thrilled. You'd love it. You'd just make all the money, right? So, the easiest answer, and the most obvious answer, is to just play tighter ranges. When you play against good players who know they should be re-raising a lot, or at least a reasonable amount, you must tighten up. Uh-oh, what's happening to my chat? Something's happening to my chat. Give me 1 second. Screen capture. We have the smart capture feature for the chat, but sometimes it's not so smart. All right, let's try this. I apologize for everyone listening, but we need to have the chat working properly. There we go. I think it's working now. All right, good. Okay. So, first things first, tighten up a little bit, right? That's the easiest answer. It's not the most fun answer, right? But it is an answer that is often ideal. Quite often when you're playing against good players, you just have to sit there and play strong ranges. So what's the easiest way to play strong ranges? Well, stop playing the offsuit hands, right? The easiest thing, or the thing that you can do to make continuing the easiest is to open hands that can continue against 3-bets, right? And this is going to be a lot of stuff like suited connectors, right? You'd much rather have suited connectors than King-9 offsuit. That said, you should probably still open hands like Ace-10 and King-Jack from most positions, and realize that those are just your raises and then you're going to fold them, right? It's okay to fold some hands to raises. But don't be opening 10-9 offsuit and Jack-10 offsuit and 9-7 offsuit. Like, that's just going to get you in a ton of trouble. If you watch a lot of the best players in the world, if it gets folded to them in the cutoff, they fold ace-x offsuit, for example, right? A lot of people think it's insane to fold ace-7 offsuit from the cutoff. But this is like a standard fold against good players. You do not have to play those hands. And you shouldn't play those hands. Let's see. Can we discuss how to play against limpers? I know I have a book about this. It's called Strategies for Beating Small Stakes Poker Cash Games or Strategies for Beating Small Stakes Poker Tournaments. You can find it at jonathanlowepoker.com/books. But we do discuss that thoroughly there because that's something a lot of people do. All right, so anyway, first things first, tighten up. Tighten up, play stronger ranges. If you play stronger ranges, they can't. It doesn't matter if people are aggressive against you, right? And this is a very difficult thing for most loose and aggressive players to do, like Louis-Philippe is, because he's used to playing 40% of hands. But, you got to net it up a little bit. And it's okay. That's what you're supposed to do. That is how you exploit players who are overly aggressive, right? Whenever you know someone's going to 3-bet you a lot, you should play tighter than normal, right? You should play tighter than normal because you know you're going to face aggression. This is what happens when you're playing 20 big blinds deep and they fold you on the button. If you know you have 2 20 big blind stacks in the blinds who are going to jam on you very often, you must tighten up and raise with a range where you're only folding like 25 or 30% of hands to a jam. And that often means folding some weaker hands or just open jamming yourself perhaps. So be aware of that. Next, let's assume we are playing rather deep stacked. You can 4-bet more often, right? This became very popular 5 or 6 years ago. I remember online, every time I would raise and get 3-bet, I would just 4-bet. Just 4-bet everything. And people would fold because they assumed that people are opening a little wide, and if they 4-bet, they must have a very, very good hand. So if you must have a very, very good hand to 4-bet, then they should just easily fold, right? So, 4-bet more. Which are the best hands to 4-bet? Well, that depends on your opponent's strategy, right? If your opponent is going to call your 3-bet or your 4-bet a lot, then you want to be 4-betting with just good linear hands, right? You want to be 4-betting your ace-queen for value. You want to be 4-betting stuff like maybe Jack-10 suited that has a pretty good amount of equity, or 8-7 suited that has a good amount of equity. Those are all hands that make a lot of sense to 4-bet. You could, if you think your opponent's going to fold to your 4-bet or go all in, then you want to be 4-betting with blockers. These are hands that make it more difficult for your opponent to have a reasonable hand to go all in with. So that's going to be hands like ace-jack, right? You block aces, ace-king, ace-queen, pocket jacks, and that's good. And you know you can 4-bet the ace-jack and then fold it to a shove because it does quite poorly against the shoving range, unless, of course, your opponent's absolutely maniacal. Most people are not absolutely maniacal, though. They have found a strategy of 3-betting a lot, and once they realize they can 3-bet a lot, they do that. That is their exploit. And they do assume that people are going to react honestly, so you need to bluff more. So Louis-Philippe, really, there are only 2 good answers to your problem of how do you play against someone who's 3-betting you a lot, and that is to tighten up and 4-bet more. The idea of calling, especially from out of position, is not such a good idea because it's really hard to defend out of position. If you are going to be calling out of position, you want to make sure you're calling with a very strong range that can check call or check jam, depending on the stacks, on a lot of flops. So generally, you don't want to respond by calling more, unless your range is just very strong. What is a nitty player? A nitty player is a tight player who doesn't play very many hands. The opposite of a maniac. Think of someone who just does not play any hands. That is a nitty player. Would you consider 20% of hands to be a good tight range or less? Well, Michael, it depends on your position. Entirely depends on your position, right? If you're under the gun, then 20% of hands would be insane to play. But if you're on the button, you should be playing way more than 20% of hands. Right? So don't get caught up with the idea of I need to raise 20% of hands from all positions. All right. What else can we discuss? Uncle Eddie's here. Welcome. Hello, Uncle Eddie. Playing Maniacal is fun. Playing Maniacal is fun. Feel free to get out of your comfort zone. Do not be afraid. I guess we'll talk about limpers while we're here. Whenever people are limping in front of you with hands like king, queen, queen, jack, etc., what should you do? Well, the answer is it depends. What does it depend on? It depends on how your opponents are going to respond. If they are going to limp and then call and then check fold every flop where they miss, you can justify raising quite wide, right? Because they are going to call and then check fold every time they miss, and you're just going to win 65% of the pots. You're just going to be printing money. If they're going to limp and then re-raise, well, just only raise with really, really good hands, right? They can easily continue. But usually you're going to find most limpers are weak, tight, and passive. They are limping with hands they don't think are good enough to raise, right? So if they're limping hands that are not good enough to raise, that means their range does not contain the best hands, which means they're starting with a disadvantage right off the bat, right? And they're out of position most of the time. So you have two things going for you that are amazing. Also, if they're just going to check fold every time they miss, that's also amazing. And that's usually what most people are doing. They're limping with marginal stuff, hoping to flop well, and then put in a lot of money. So, you put in small amounts of money, you win all the small pots, and whenever they decide to put lots of money in, you just never ever pay them. How do you sustain composure after coolers? We discussed this yesterday in perspective and the day before. Basically, you just don't care about losing because you don't control when you win and when you lose. Only care about things that you can control. Because at the end of the day, well, you can care about things, but only let things emotionally affect you that you can control. Because at the end of the day, you don't control most things, and if you get upset whenever you lose a hand, you're going to lose your mind. Dimani says, is it better to bet big and price your opponent out, or bet small and keep him in? Well, it depends on the spot, obviously. Typically, though, you're going to find that you can't price people out in No Limit Hold'em unless you bet gigantic. And when you bet gigantic, then you only get called when you're beat. You don't want to only get called when you're beat. How do we combat someone who is intentionally slowing down the game online? You can't. You're allowed to have your time bank online. Your time bank is a resource, and you're allowed to use it. Perhaps I'm not understanding what you're asking, Vegasale. If you are given time on the internet, and it is very clear that you are allowed to use that time however you want. It seems like every other day we get a question about, how do I deal with the coolers? How do I deal with running bad? And the answer is really just to understand that variance is part of the game. You understand what you signed up for, realize you're going to get unlucky a lot of the time, and also realize unlucky in poker is not really unlucky. Like, say you get it all in with aces and lose to fours. Well, you're going to lose 20-ish% of the time. So if you know you're going to lose 20% of the time, why are you unhappy, right? 20%'s a lot. How much for private coaching? Currently, I charge $300 an hour. You can message me at support@pokercoaching.com. I have a very full schedule, but I will maybe fit you in if our goals align. What's the next series I'm playing? I'm having a baby in December. So we're doing the hospital grind for a little bit. Would you agree that you have to be careful with the top 10% of hands against limpers? Oh, it depends on the limper, right? I discussed this thoroughly, and Mastering Small Stakes Poker Tournaments and Strategies for Beating Small Stakes Poker Tournaments and Strategies for Beating Small Stakes Poker Cash Games. There are regular limpers, just like the weak type, and then there are tricky limpers. You have to figure out who you're against and adjust accordingly. By default, I consider most limpers to be weak, tight, and passive, but some are tricky. And if they are tricky, you know they're tricky, and then you adjust, right? Kevin says he played a pretty standard hand. He raised with aces, big blind calls, comes 10xx. I guess his opponent led into him, you called. Turn, your opponent checked, you bet, he called. River was a 10, it goes check, check. Yeah, easy check on the river. Whenever the board changes in a way that is excellent for your opponent's range and awful for your range, you should do a lot of checking, right? And notice that the big blind should have way more 10x hands than the under the gun player, right? Under the gun's not raising very many 10x's, maybe just like ace 10 suited and jack 10 suited and 10-9 suited maybe. So when the 10 pair's on the river, that's really good for the opponent's range. When the opponent's range improves significantly, you want to do a lot of checking. That's just Game Theory 101. What does GTO mean? Game Theory Optimal. It's a term that essentially refers to playing in a manner that is unexploitable, but there are a lot of principles that come from playing unexploitably that you can very easily apply to your game, like that example right there. Whenever your opponent's range improves significantly, that's bad for you. When it's bad for you and your range, you want to be checking. So Kevin says he figured he had Jack 10. Kevin, why could he not have Ace 10, King 10, Queen 10, Jack 10, 10 9, or 10 8? Why only Jack 10? Why would people rather play against good players than bad players? That's not good logic. No one says that who understands poker. You make money in poker by playing against players who are worse than you. If you play against good players, they're going to beat you. A lot of people think that bad players show up with wide ranges, therefore they're difficult to play against. But that's a good thing. You want your opponents showing up with garbage. You want your opponents making mistakes. If your opponents play well, you're going to get demolished. So, Kevin, you're making a classic error of assuming your opponent has one specific hand and not a range. Your opponent always has a range. There is no difference at all between Queen 10, Jack 10, and 10 9. Right? They are all exactly the same. So, there's no reason to think your opponent has one specific hand. Always put your opponent on a range of hands. But anyway, yes. Well, so listen, Kevin, don't be offended by this, but anytime you hear someone say, I put him on Jack 10, that is a sign of someone who does not think about ranges properly. And that is a big leak. It is a big, big leak. One of the biggest and first hurdles you must get over whenever it comes to improving at poker is putting your opponent on a range. And even thinking in your head, I think he has Jack 10, is a mistake. That logic, just having that in your brain going, I'm putting him on Ace King, so I'm going to fold, right? That will lead you to make mistakes, even if you are thinking about ranges in general. And you can say, I think he most likely has Jack 10, but that means like he has Jack 10, 4% of the time, and he has Queen 10 3.9% of the time, and he has 10 9 3.9% of the time, right? That's not like it's not even a good prediction, right? Let's see. But anyway, yeah, you beat players because they play poorly. Anyone who says, I like to play against good players because they're more predictable, does not understand where profit comes from in games. You want to play with people who mess up. The farther people play from Game Theory Optimal, the more holes there are for you to exploit, or just naturally exploit by playing well. You don't even have to know what they're doing wrong. That really is the power of Game Theory Optimal strategies, is you don't even have to know what your opponents are doing wrong. If you just sit there and play well, you will win. And that's quite powerful, right? And if your opponents do have gigantic holes in their game, they're just going to be spewing money left and right to you. Is it ever a good idea to triple barrel bluff against players you don't have a solid read on? Of course. Absolutely. Whenever you have obvious triple barrel bluff hands, you should be triple barrel bluffing. Vibe said, how did I get into poker? I have a pokerography episode made about me. It's a 22-minute documentary. You can get it at jonathanlittlepoker.com/pokerography. POKEROGROPHY. That has my full story of how I got into poker. You feel like sometimes they think straightforward players are good players, and that's why they prefer against playing against good players. They probably don't know what a good player is. Playing weak, tight, and straightforward is not good poker. Can I talk about my shove with King Queen in the 25K? Oh, very easy spot. Cutoff raise. Good player, Joe Cassidy. Certainly plays reasonable ranges. He opened in the cutoff. I had King Queen with 18 big blinds. Easy all in. There's no other option. We were not on the bubble. A lot of people think, oh, but you were near the bubble. There were, I think, 43 players left and 39 got paid. That's just an easy shove. If you're not shoving there quite wide, you're probably messing up. 18 big blinds was not a big stack or a short stack. It was a shorter stack. I was probably like number 39 out of 43. So I needed to make something happen. And if you've ever played against reasonable opponents, you know bubbles and high rollers take quite a while most of the time. So just an easy all-in. You need to be shoving very wide there. If you're not shoving like suited connectors, ace-x offsuit, all pairs, most Broadway hands, you're playing way too tight. Also, people think, oh, but you're so close to the money. Yeah, but it actually took them 4 more hours to get in the money, which is normal. You can't sit there with an 18 big blind stack for 4 hours. It just doesn't work. You have to make something happen. What would you consider 3-betting a lot? At what point do you decide you need to 4-bet someone more? I start by just playing reasonable ranges, and it naturally works out. Like, I don't even have to know if someone's 3-betting a lot. Once you do know someone is 3-betting a lot, quite often those players don't like folding 2 4-bets. So you have to be careful with that. But if you get one of the obvious 4-betting hands, you just do it. It's just good, solid poker, right? Isn't it just the cards that win no matter who is playing them? In the short run, to some extent. But quite often, imagine we both get aces, right? If I win 5 big blinds with my aces, but you win 4 big blinds with your aces, you are losing a ton of value. Obviously, if you get completely hit by the deck, you're going to have an easy time winning. But that's not how poker works. So what is a bad player? A bad player is someone who plays their cards in a manner that loses them equity compared to a good player. Let's see. How far are we calling off of marginal hands? You often want to call off whenever you do not block the obvious bluffs. And you want to be calling off wide when you have a lot of obvious bluffs or draws missed. That's a very easy spot to hero call. Like in the 5K, I hero called against Anatoly Filatov in a spot where his range, in my mind, was a lot of busted draws and nut hands. And he just happened to have a nut hand, right? I did not block any of the bluffs, so it was an easy call with a hero call. Do I play in any of these places in New York? Nope. Have I been playing cash games here? Nope. Remember, I do not play poker to pass the time. That is not something I'm doing, and I have lots going on. So, Cindy saying, isn't it all just about the cards? Well, the question is, whenever you're just determining if a game requires skill, you want to ask, can someone purposefully play worse? In poker, can you purposefully play worse? Think about this. Can you lose on purpose in poker? What's my next commentary gig? I don't know. Nothing is lined up. Most of the time, they don't line up commentary gigs until the day before, unless you're like the head commentator, and no one likes me enough to make me the head commentator yet. Maybe one day. Send a message to Party Poker, Poker Stars, 888, all of them, and let them know I will be their head commentator. Let's see. So, can you purposely play worse in No Limit Texas Hold'em? Right? Well, the obvious answer is yes. You can obviously butcher yourself. You can get your aces and you can fold. You can get your 9-4 offsuit and you can go all in. So it's easy to play poorly. Therefore, there is skill required. Now the question is how much skill is required. Like in tic-tac-toe, for example, you can purposefully lose, but it's not so hard to learn to play game theory optimal. You know how to play perfect tic-tac-toe if you've played tic-tac-toe for 4 minutes, right? So, is it difficult to play your hands in the most profitable manner? And it turns out the answer is actually yes. It actually is quite difficult. And that's just because it requires a large fundamental understanding of the game, which is very, very hard to grasp. If you take the best human and pit them against the best computer in heads-up no limit hold'em, or heads-up limit hold'em, they're going to get crushed. Which means there's a very high skill barrier here, right? So, obviously, if I get aces and you get 3-2 offsuit, you're going to lose. But that is in the short run, right? But the short run is not what matters. What happens on any individual day does not matter. What matters is what happens over the long run. And if you look at the careers of some players versus other players, you'll see even like good pros. Some players win tons and some people win less. Quite often, that's an indicator of skill if they've played enough games. Back when I used to play sit and goes, some players were winning at 12% return on investment. Some people were winning at 8% return on investment. Why? Well, the people with 12% were playing better. They had more skill. And we had, hundreds and thousands of tournaments under all of our belts. So clearly there is skill there, because you just don't get better cards over 100,000 tournaments. It doesn't work. And there's relatively low variance in sit and goes, just because there's only 9 people playing. And that's it. Please talk more about my 20 big blind strategy. You just saw my video blog from the 25K. If you've not seen that already, I just posted it last night. You can find it at youtube.com/floattheturn. It's also on my blog at johnflinlowpoker.com under the blog section. But anyway, listen, if someone raises and you have 20 big blinds, you need to be going all in a lot. This is just good, fundamentally sound poker. The only time you really need to be flatting is when you are on exactly the button or exactly in the big blind. Flatting in other spots really doesn't make a lot of sense. You want to be jamming because you have fold equity. Fold equity is really important. I discussed this in my very first book, Strategies for Beating Small Stakes Poker Tournaments. I discuss it extensively. So it's just an easy all-in spot. I mean, when someone raises, you go all in. When someone raises, what percent of hands do you shove? It depends on their opening range, right? If your opponent's nitty, if they're not opening very many hands, then you should be shoving quite wide. I'm sorry, the opposite of that. If they're nitty and tight and they don't open very many hands, you need to be shoving very tightly. If they are opening a lot of hands, you should be shoving quite wide. Now, very often early position players only open with tight hands, or strong hands, therefore you don't want to be shoving very wide. If people are opening in late position, like in the 25K, the cutoff raised, cutoff should be opening a lot of hands. Therefore, King-Queen does pretty well. It also has blockers to the calling range. It's a great hand to shove. So you need to be shoving very wide. Sam says, after working with solvers, you've totally changed your short stack play. You'd be amazed what the computer thinks is right. Yeah, I mean, you need to be quite aggressive is what it amounts to. You can flat sometimes. Make sure you are using multi-way simulators, not just heads up. Under the gun limps. You 3-bet with ace-king. Small blind with 30 big blinds. What do you do? Shove or fold? Under the gun limps. Cut off 3-bets. You have ace-king. All in. Easy all in, Harsh. Easy, easy, easy all in. And you say your opponent had aces. Yeah, so, I mean, who cares? You're going to lose with aces. You're going to lose 2 aces. I mean, what do you want from me? What do you want from me? Sometimes you're going to lose. When you get the nuts, you're supposed to lose to the real nuts. Do you widen your ranges when playing 6-handed cash games? No. Some things a lot of people don't quite understand is 6-handed cash games are essentially like 9-handed cash games, except for the first 3 people folded. Realize under the gun 6-handed is not under the gun 9-handed. It's the low jack seat, right? Then there's the hijack seat and the cutoff seat. So low jack ranges 9-handed should be very similar to low jack ranges 6-handed. Now, you should be slightly tighter in 6-handed because whenever the first 3 people fold, let me make sure I'm getting this right. I'm getting slightly confused. Whenever the first 3 people fold at full ring, you know they folded garbage. Therefore, the players yet to act have better ranges. So you should be slightly wider 6-handed, but barely, 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 barely. I had it backwards. You should be barely, barely, barely wider. I spend a third of every little coffee trying to explain variance. Yeah, it seems like that's something just most people do not quite understand. So Sam says you should be slow playing your aces. You should be slow playing your aces very often. Now, Sam, you have to ask, who are you playing against and what are they going to assume? Realize whenever it says limp aces, it's also suggesting limping some other hands as well. The problem is most people don't limp the other hands. They just they just only limp the aces. You have to make sure that if you are going to blindly follow solvers, that you follow the solvers well. Unless, of course, you're trying to exploit tendencies in your opponent's strategies. Azar says, can you shove? Queen Jack, King 10, King... Yeah, like all these good hands, yes. You can shove. When someone raises, you can shove if they are opening wide. Should you open shove? Maybe, maybe not. Some of those you want to shove, some hands you want to min raise. It's hard to teach people long-term EV. Yeah, that's because most people only care about what happened this time. A lot of people don't understand that, like say you watch two teams play a sporting event, like a baseball game, right? If one team wins, a lot of people think that that team is better, right? If the team is better, or the team must have won because they are better. But no. The team won because they're going to win X percentage of the time, and this is that percentage of the time. I mean, this is how sport betting works, right? If you see one team's going to win 60% of the time, the other team's going to win 40% of the time, they're going to win roughly that amount if you're looking at the lines, right? And if they play this game 1,000 times, one team's going to win 600 of them. That team is better, but on any individual day, obviously the 40% is going to come in. Just because something happens one time does not mean that it is necessarily right or wrong or whatever. Is there a big difference between big blind ante tournaments? Not until you get very shallow stacked. Just because whenever you're shallow stacked, well, a hand came up in Montreal, actually. I lost lots of my chips. I got down to like 5 big blinds, and I was under the gun +1. I had 9-2 offsuit. I folded. Next hand, I had 8-7 offsuit, and I went all in for 5 big blinds. If you look at a push-fold chart, it'll tell you to go with something like 3 big blinds with 8-7 offsuit. But what happens if you fold this hand? Well, next hand, I go down to 4 big blinds because one of my big blinds is just dead in the ante. So I really need to push hard in that exact spot. So you have to understand that that changes. We are working with someone to try to figure out how to shove for the big blind ante. But it's actually much more difficult than just plugging it into a simple computer program because you have to consider future game simulations. There's only one program I know that does this at the moment. It's ICMizer. And even then, they admit that they don't have it right. So it's very difficult to assume what's going to happen on the next hand and the next hand and the next hand and the next hand. So be careful of that. Cindy says, you get impatient in the early stages of a tournament. Why? And does it matter, right? You just said it didn't matter because some people get good cards and some people don't. If you think it doesn't matter, then it doesn't matter if you get impatient because you're just playing roulette. Imagine a game like roulette. Going back to can you play poorly? Can you play worse at roulette than anyone else, assuming all the bets have the same negative ROI? And the answer is no. It literally does not matter what you do when you play roulette. What about craps? Now, craps has a lot of different bets. Roulette actually has a few different bets too. But roulette has a lot of different bets where some are worse than others. So you can play craps in a manner that is almost break even. You're still going to lose, but you can almost break even at craps. And you can play craps in a manner that makes you lose a ton. Like if you're betting on the hard 12 and all this business. Hard 12. I don't even know the game. All 12s are hard 12s. So you can play worse, therefore there is skill involved in this game. Even though you can't win, there still is skill involved, but you still cannot be a win. Or you still cannot be a winner. Not doing so well with words today. You use color ranges on your heads-up display. I don't really use them. Some people do. I think as your heads-up display gets more and more advanced, you probably do need to start using many more colors. I mean, I just use whatever the natural color-coded things are. Like if I see green, I know it's super loose VPIP. But I have not spent a ton of time fixing it. Do I think the final table should revert back to regular ante? I don't think it matters that much. Listen, with structure changes, you just learn the new structure and you adjust. That's it. Should you play GTO or exploitative when you have 2x average? The fact that you have 2x average doesn't matter. So get rid of that from the question. And obviously you should play exploitable when people have big mistakes in their game that you know about, right? You exploit people when they make mistakes. If you don't know what they're going to do wrong, you cannot exploit them. But very often you do know what they do wrong, so you exploit them. I think a lot of people don't quite understand. A lot of people don't understand the history of poker. It's very important to understand history. So, when people see something like the big blind ante change, they think, oh my god, this is huge, we should fight this because this is not poker anymore. Well, do you remember what poker used to be? Back in the 70s. They didn't even play no limit hold'em. Before that, maybe they didn't play limit hold'em. I don't know. I'm not caught up on the 1800s variations of poker. But they used to play 7-card stud. Right? That's a completely different game. They used to play limit hold'em. Then someone came up with the idea of, hey, wouldn't it be fun if I could bet more than 1 unit? That'd be great. So they changed the game. Could you imagine the first time someone said, let's, instead of playing limit hold'em, let's play no limit hold'em? Outrage, right? Did you all know that limit hold'em and no limit hold'em used to be played with only 1 big blind? Could you imagine if they added a 3rd big blind? What would that do to the game? That would be insane. People would go nuts. But games change over time to make the game better. So what does poker need? Poker needs to be faster. The reason poker, if poker is going to fail, the reason poker is going to fail is because the game is slow. This is why they've introduced the shot clock, right? This is why they've introduced the big blind ante. These things keep players in action. If you look at games, almost all popular games over time stay popular because they are interactive. And if they're not interactive, people don't play. This is why you're seeing like mobile games, for example, being very, very popular and overtaking many, many other games because they are interactive and they're fast. And this is why 6-handed is more popular online than 9-handed, right? 9-handed is more commonly played in live poker for the obvious reasons of cost to the casino. But online, heads up and 6-handed are very, very popular formats because you're in the action. So, what causes action? More money in the pot causes action. This is why they play with an ante in many games, especially a lot of high-stakes games. And fewer players at the table creates action. So there are lots of things you can do to create action, but that is often what makes a game good. So Thomas now says, apparently poker needs more 5-card, 6-card, PLO, etc. And the question is, at what point do you get action at the detriment to the profitability of your game? Right? The problem with games like PLO and 5-card PLO and 6-card PLO and 24-card PLO is that skill edges diminish. As edges diminish, it becomes more and more impossible to make money from the game. A very important trait of poker is that you can win money. People care about poker because it is financially and emotionally attached to them. If you play a game of checkers and you lose, it's not going to ruin your day. If you play a game of poker and you lose a lot of money, it's going to ruin your day, right? For some people. And that's a good thing about poker. That's one of the reasons poker has thrived. I actually have a blog post about this. There are 10 aspects of a successful game. This is a talk and an article given by a well-known game designer named Mark Rosewater. And he goes through all the aspects of games and discusses a few games and where they succeed and where they fail. And I decided to go through poker and discuss where poker succeeds and fails. You can find that on my blog. I'm sure you can just look up Jonathan Little 10 aspects of a successful game or something like that. And it's very important to understand the game you're playing and why it succeeds, why it fails, how it could be better, how it could be worse, and go from there. Louis Philippe says he gets in a lot of trouble when he calls 3-bets. Going back to the original topic of today, how to play against consistent 3-betters. Yeah, you got to stop calling the 3-bets, Louis Philippe. Most of the time, with the weaker part of your range, King, Queen suited, or Jack 10 suited. Those are not the weaker part of your range, Louis Philippe. I already know you're loose and aggressive. King, Queen suited, and Jack 10 suited are not the bottom. I know that to be a fact. So, you're going to get especially in a lot of trouble by calling with the offsuit stuff. If a player raises your big blind in a tournament, should you call every time? Josh, this is not a good question. Why is this not a good question? This is not a good question because how much are they raising? Are they min raising? Is there an ante in play? Are they raising to 7 big blinds? Right? If they raise to 7 big blinds, you should fold almost everything. If they raise to the minimum, you should be defending quite wide. How do you keep stats like VPIP and in the money percentage? I use a program called Hold'em Manager. You can find that at jonathanlittlepoker.com/resources. Louis Philippe says, you really enjoy the poker coaching quizzes because they allow you to get reward points. Yes, they do. You can turn it into great study material. I'm glad you're enjoying the site. By the way, you all can get a free trial if you have not. Go to pokercoaching.com. It's completely free to sign up for a week. Let's see. Sam says, you should generally be less aggressive when there are no antes in play. Whenever there's more money in the pot, often when there's more money at risk, you should be trying to fight for that a little bit harder, right? And antes induce action because everyone knows they need to be fighting a little bit harder. Is the shot clock designed for players or a viewing audience? Probably both. I mean, listen, the reason poker became very unfun for a few years is because people started going really slow. And players don't like that. What's the best way to learn Magic? The Gathering. Watch a lot of videos. There's a site called channelfireball.com. They have all sorts of video content there. And just play a lot. Play a lot, try to figure out why you're losing, why you're winning, and go from there. But I would tell you to learn a game that has the potential to better your life. Now, Magic is a good game. It can better your life. But there's no money in it. And it costs money. So realize it is strictly a hobby. And if you're anything like me, you have a bit of an addictive personality, hobbies will get you in trouble. There's a reason I do not play golf, for example, because I know everyone who plays golf is hopelessly addicted to it. And they spend tons of money and a ton of time. And I don't have a ton of money or a ton of time. How does the big blind change? We just discussed this. We literally just discussed this, David. Go back and watch the video if you missed it. You're that guy that tanks at your local card room. Well, don't be the guy that tanks at the local card room. Play quickly. No one. Remember, you want people to want to play with you. When you see people like Andrew Roble and Tom Dwan, who get to play the biggest, softest cash games in the world, ask yourself, why do they get to play those games instead of other people? Well, it's because people like to play with them. Whenever you play a game, you need your opponents to like you. Otherwise, you don't get to play. I think a lot of people get in their minds that I need to make sure that I am taking advantage of this exact moment to the best of my ability. But they think very short term. You need to not think short term. You need to think very long term. Very often, if you're playing a private home game, for example, you need to splash around a bit. You need to get in there and gamble a little bit. You need to give action. Why do you need to give action? Well, because if you don't, you won't get invited back. You don't get to play again. I know Phil Galfond has a story about this where he went to go play poker, high stakes poker, and he knew he had something like 2 buy-ins to play with for the 3 days that he thought he'd get to play. So he was going to play rather nitty on the first day, try to get reads on people, try to not risk his stack because he really didn't want to go broke because he only had 200K to bring or whatever it was. So he played nitty on the first day, and then he didn't get invited back for the second day. He's like, what the hell? Why did I get invited back? Well, it's because he was not good for TV, right? Since then, he's learned, obviously. And most people learn. Often you have to learn through experience, but you need to give action to get action in most aspects in life, right? It's not all about you. If you're out there trying to only look out for yourself, you're not going to get very far. You have to help people. You have to give people what they want. So what do recreational players want when they're playing poker? Well, they want a good atmosphere. They want to have fun. They want action. And people like Roble and Tom Dwan and Phil Galfond now, they give action. And they are fun to play with. And they're nice, right? People like that, who are also good at poker, are the ones who make all the money. You see lots of great online players who completely ignore this aspect of the game. And they don't get good action. They may make 100K a year, whereas other people are making millions a year. Not because of their actual poker skill, but because of their life skills and their cultivation of game skills. So I don't really know. I never interacted with Chip Reese really, besides playing with him a time or two in tournaments. But there was this idea, or there is this idea, that he was perhaps the best at getting players to like to play with him. And he did this in all sorts of ways. By just being nice, by always giving action, by treating people well. And from what I understand, everyone enjoyed playing with him. And so, he got to play in the biggest, softest, juiciest games. Remember there was one story, I think it was him, where there was a guy in Texas who was randomly playing humongous stakes at some card room or something. And so he got in a plane, flew there. This is maybe Bobby Baldwin who did this instead. I forget who this was. Anyway, got in a plane, flew there, and as he was walking in, the other guy was walking out. He just shook his hand, got back on his plane, and went home. Didn't make a stink about it, didn't cause any issues, and that was it. Bobby Baldwin's here in the Bahamas, actually. I saw him playing yesterday. I have never interacted with Bobby Baldwin either, but seems like an interesting person. I know Doyle Brunson and Bobby Baldwin both have these they're like biographies, kind of biographies with kind of basic poker tips spread throughout. They're good books. I like them both. I forget exactly what they're called, but they were good biographies. They're not the Godfather book. It's a different book. Check those out. They're good. I have them at home. I'll maybe show them to you whenever I get back home. The Forbidden says, I'd take $100K a year playing poker. Yeah, but would you take $100K a year if you could easily make $1 million a year doing the exact same thing or something slightly different? So Alan mentions that tanking should only be done whenever it's for lots of money. And this is the problem with the shot clock, right? The problem with the shot clock is that you need the shot clock to be easily implementable. You say Bobby Baldwin is underrated. I don't think Bobby Baldwin's underrated. You don't become CEO of the biggest casino company by being underrated. Okay, problem with the shot clock. In the ideal world, you should have something like 15 seconds pre-flop, 15 seconds on the flop, 30 seconds on turn, 1 minute on the river, in my opinion. That said, how do you easily implement that? And the answer is, it's pretty hard. Also, I think you should have many time bank cards that are for shorter amounts of time. Like 15 seconds each. You should have like 12 15-second time banks. The problem is, whenever you give only a few time banks, you really don't want to use them. But there's nothing wrong with using time. You just want to make sure that people are not really abusing time, right? And I think it's important to understand that when you implement any system, it has to be both practical and it has to be functional. And as the time bank currently sits, it is kind of practical and kind of functional. But it's not ideal. It's not perfect, right? But I think it might be the best that we can realistically do. Is sports betting beatable? From what I understand, I know a few high-stakes poker players who pool their money and apparently they're crushing it. Is he reading chat? Who? Is who reading chat? I'm sure there are a lot of people here who are not reading the chat. You say Bobby Baldwin is underrated in poker. I don't know if Bobby Baldwin is good at poker or not. I've never played with him. But I know he has those life skills to get in the good games. Right? Thomas says Super System is that biography. No, it's not Super System. I think it's called like Poker Wisdom from a Champion or something like that. But I think that is what it is. I think it's a 2-book series, one with Doyle and one with Bobby Baldwin. Poker Wisdom from a Champion. I don't know. Someone look that up. Maybe that's it. Can you use the time banks on the bubble? Yeah, absolutely. Some people think that's good. Some people think that's bad. I think it's good, honestly. If they give you time banks, then you should be able to use them exactly how you please. And if you want to burn all your time banks on the bubble, you should be more than welcome to burn all your time banks on the bubble. This is what happens in online poker, right? They give you like 5 minutes time for the whole tournament. Some people burn all 5 minutes on the bubble. They have no more time left, and that is like a penalty. It's a little penalty they have, right? They don't get to use time banks later, but they got to use it on the bubble. Hoodie, you have to understand, I don't ask questions that are not useful to the audience. It's very important, whenever you are discussing anyone who has limited time, that you only ask questions that are beneficial. Otherwise, you're being a detriment. You don't want to be a detriment, right? You want to ask questions that are useful and practical. And, I mean, this comes up a lot. Whenever I post on Instagram, people will send me a message, how many chips do you have? Or someone will say something like that on Twitter. And the answer is, do you really think that someone who has a large amount of followers is going to go through and individually answer each person to say how many chips they have at that exact moment? The answer is no. You post every few hours, everyone reads it, and that's that, right? You want to make sure that you scale your time well, and as you get more and more popular, I have at least 12 followers, I think. As you get more and more popular, you have to understand that whenever you approach someone like this, you have to make sure that you are asking either a very unique question that has not been answered, or you're somehow bettering both your life and the other person's life at the same time. Otherwise, you're just wasting someone's time whose time is very valuable. And if someone wastes your time and you realize your time is valuable, you are not going to deal with them again in the future. Just because you can't waste your time, right? Time is a very valuable resource. So, I'm sure some people think it's fun, cute, whatever. They want to know how many chips you have. But it's not useful, is what it amounts to. Everyone wants to know what tournament I'm going to play next. I think I'm going to play a $1,000 tournament at noon today. I'm buying everyone coffee, by the way, at Baja Mar at Starbucks in 1 hour. Feel free to come and say hi. But what am I playing next? I'm playing a $1,000 tournament at noon or a $10,000 tournament at 1. I think I'm probably just going to play the 1,000 at noon, though. How did I do in the 5K? I just posted a blog. Oh, wait. No, I didn't. That's coming soon. How did I do? I lost. Follow the internet. Follow Twitter. Follow Instagram. I posted there. I already told you all. You don't have to ask again. Someone the other day sent me a message on Instagram wanting to know how many chips I had. And I said, please look at my story or follow me on Twitter. And they said, oh, I just like asking you personally. And I understand that you want the attention and time of people. I get that. But at some point you must understand that some people are so overwhelmed that they cannot give individual attention to every single person every single time they ask a question. As much as they want to, right? I want to give everyone individual attention, and I try my best to do it. Which is why we do a little coffee. It's why I'm going to buy coffee for whoever's here, right? Because I like interacting with you all. However, instead of being able to post my chip counts ever, if I instead had to answer everyone individually, I would get literally thousands of people asking me that question. If I had to go through and type 1800, 1800, 1800, 1800, if I had to type that 1,000 times, well, I'd have no time, right? So, be reasonable, realize we're all doing our best, and that's it. DeMonty says, LOL, I'm doing good. You get overwhelmed with just family and friends. Yeah, well, it's tough. Who is the richest poker player in the world? Do they have a net worth of over 5 million? I bet the richest poker player in the world does have a net worth of over 5 million. All right, I have to go. Instagram says I'm done in 1 minute, so you might as well pack it up. I'll be back tomorrow. It's been fun hanging out with all of you. Hope you have a great day. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about being card dead and being spot dead. That'll be fun. And if you all have any questions, feel free to email them to me at support@pokercoaching.com. I am always happy to answer the questions. You're headed to Borgata. Good luck. Borgata's a good place. I'm always looking for topics for a little coffee. So, you might as well give me topics for a little coffee. Have a great day. Good luck in your games. Thanks for being here. And I'll talk to you later.